Hello, my name is Ian Welch, and I am an artist, printmaker, and educator, and welcome to my solo exhibition, The Soft Encroachment. I think the interesting thing about using a term like the soft encroachment is it reflects on how there's a push and pull between ourselves and our environment. You know, it's never one-sided. You know, if you leave a field untended, it will grow. You know, if you cut down a tree, something will typically grow back. You know, even finding little plants in the sidewalk. You know, there's always going to be things that push and pull in terms of nature, and it is kind of a give and take, I think. And understanding that there is a dialogue that happens between ourselves and our environment, I think, is really important. Honestly, the Earth is going to be here after we are. You know, I think that's the one thing that drives the less pessimistic tendencies that I have. Some of the work can get a little pessimistic in these pieces, but I mean, overall, I just tend to think that, you know, nature perseveres, nature will keep moving forward. And, you know, the Earth will be fine. We're the ones that need to be worried. So I think that just kind of showing and demonstrating these scenarios where we have things like logging and we have things like deforestation, and specifically things like where we're maybe cutting down like old growth areas, or you know, we're growing scrub pine when we should be growing more biodiverse environments. We're kind of cutting our nose off and spite our face a little bit. So I think that my work manages to not be pessimistic because I'm always thinking about the future and understanding that, you know, we have to be better or it won't matter. And there's like a quote that I really like that says, let the birds be louder than the traffic. So I think that's an important thing too. I think it's interesting when you're making work about the space you inhabit, because you are ultimately affecting that space as well. So, you know, I'm not trying to cast necessarily a judgmental eye towards other people. Like, I recognize that in the small community that I live in, logging is a big business. You know, it is an industry, and I'm not trying to condemn people for having a job and having industry. I just want people to be responsible about how they go about that industry. And ultimately understanding that, you know, what is it, the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, where you're destined to affect whatever you observe? Same idea. Like, you will ultimately have an impact. And I realize that, like, if I'm, you know, walking out into a field, I need to be very careful about where I'm stepping. Like, you know, if I'm, you know, trying to pay attention to an environment where I might follow a deer trail, to make sure that I'm not, you know, just like plowing through a space and making things worse. So yeah, it's really about, again, it's about that whole idea of reciprocity and understanding that, you know, we are part of this system, and because we're part of these systems, we have to accept our place in them and bear a little bit of responsibility in them. Yeah, so I typically use like a modified version of like a kitty formation for my paper. I did study fibers in grad school, so I did a lot of paper making back then, but it was mostly with like cotton rag and stuff like that. And I have to be very considerate with a lot of my hand-made paper, because I have to think about if I'm doing an etching or if I'm doing a wood cut, that's going to put a lot of strain on the surface and substrate. Whereas if I'm doing something like one of these more recent watercolors, I'm not really that concerned about the substrate falling apart, because I'm not having to soak it, run it through, you know, how many hundreds of pounds of pressure. with a printing press. So what I usually will do is I'll usually just go around and find bark, different pieces of material and detritus that I can find. Like I said, it's usually bark, and I will usually cut it with cotton rag. So I'll take paper from offcuts, for example. If I'm trimming a piece and I have some offcut paper, I will throw that back into the pile for when I'm making new paper. So I'm still trying to be conscientious about not wasting material, because the irony is not lost on me that I'm talking about ecology, but I'm using paper all the time. So I'm constantly trying to think about how I can reuse those materials. But yeah, I gather up the material. I have a Ninja blender that's held up pretty well for the last 2 years, and I grind everything down. I have some different molds and decals for doing paper making, various sizes. And if you've ever done any kind of paper making before, it's a laborious process to get set up, but it's actually very quick once you get going. Honestly, it's a lot like printmaking in that way, where you have a lot of setup and then you're just go, and you're making a lot of paper in a very short span of time. So yeah, I typically tend to enjoy that part of it too, because again, it reconnects me to the land, to the work that I'm doing, and it's one more step that I think adds a little bit more to the work overall. I would say that I'm not necessarily giving the trees a second life or anything, but what I am trying to do is I am kind of trying to honor their use. I don't want to use sacrifice, because I think that's like humanizing things a little bit more than they need to be. But when I spend 40 hours on a drawing, it is kind of my way of honoring like what those trees were, what they used to be, what they are now. And I think it's important to go back to that idea of like empathy and compassion. There's a really great Wendell Berry quote that it all turns on kindness, and understanding that we as a community of creators, artists, and just people who give a damn about breathing air, we have to be conscientious about those sacrifices. We have to be conscientious about when we cut a tree down, there is an impact. It's not just we're clearing an area of space, we're cutting off a potential supply of carbon. We are, if we leave a tree down and we clear cut it and we don't move it, for example, we don't sell it for lumber, that can be its own ecological environment too. And things can stem from, new growth can stem from that destruction too. So yeah, I think it's important to like constantly go back to that idea of like trying to respect the space and respect what those like different lives have led. Because again, I don't want to necessarily humanize or anthropomorphize trees, because they aren't there. But there is a degree of connectivity, there is a degree of connection between those trees. For example, like I said, some of the work that somebody like Robin Wallace Kimmer's done, they're talking about like this idea that if you attack a tree with poison, for example, other trees will actually feed nutrients and carbon back to that tree to help stem the infection. Because the forest itself recognizes that if one tree is in danger, the rest of the trees are in danger. So a threat to one is a threat to all. So we're getting into politics here a little bit. I think that carries over to our contemporary American landscape right now too. So, and just political landscape as well, not just a physical one. I use those like bright colors. Bright colors started becoming important, like I mentioned before, when I was thinking about like flagging ribbons and these like delineations of space. but they're also like these really unnatural colors for a reason, because again, I want that tension to exist between the natural and the man-made. So there are certain colors and pigments that you can't achieve through natural dyes. Like for example, all my tree ring drawings that I have in the back corner of the gallery, like those are all hand-dyed paper, and I had to use like synthetic dyes to do that. You know, so I kind of had to like break my own rule a little bit, but I wanted that intensity of color. And using those like bright neons and things like that, it's a way to just draw another layer of attention to the different elements. And I'm just kind of looking around at my work. Usually the colors are the human incursion. The bright colors are usually happening where it's, I like this idea of having like black and white imagery that's really dense and really rich and really well rendered, and then just like slapping this flat shape over top of it, because it is kind of how I feel like we treat our environment sometimes. You know, we don't care or consider what was there before, and we're just kind of going in and trying to introduce order into those things. So I think about some of my newer pieces, like for example, the print over there, the drawing over there that has the kind of like pyramid shape with the pink lines in it. Like that's trying to introduce order into a system that didn't have the same degree of order that you would think. You know, obviously the natural world is ordered, but it looks and feels differently than what we experience. And I enjoy kind of pointing out where it's like, okay, like what you're doing is making an impact. You know, what you're doing is affecting the space. And I think having those like bright moments of color and those like bright pops are just kind of demonstrating that further. I don't have a choice in the matter. Like that's honestly just how I keep going about things, is that I don't have a choice but to get better. I don't have a choice but to stick around. I have too many people in my life that depend on me. Not that I hold a high opinion of myself, but I do know that a lot of other people do love and care about me. So again, those ideas of like talking about empathy and compassion, like I've had to open myself up to accept help, you know, and I'm used to being someone who's usually the person, you know, boots on the ground, helping other people. So creating in like the face of adversity like that, it's just, like I said, it's just breathing for me. I don't know how I couldn't not make art when I'm trying to deal with this. You know, like there's no other way around it, and I know that it's helping me get better. You know, it's giving me a focus, it's giving me intention, and it's allowing me to live like a more purposeful life. You know, like one of my like things that whenever I'm doing like a chemo update or something like that on social media, because people have asked like that I keep everybody informed, I always sign off with the phrase "no wasted days," and for me that is really important. You know, to reflect on, I need to do one thing of value every day, whether that's teaching, whether that's making art, whether that's just sitting at home and enjoying my fiance's company and yelling at the cat, you know, any of that. It's all something that matters. And it's a weird situation to be in where it's like I simultaneously have to look towards the future because I have to plan for it. But also I'm having to constantly be very mindful of the present. So that kind of dichotomy is, I think, something that I'm still grappling with. But like I said, if I didn't make art, I don't know what I would do. So it's just, again, it's breathing. It's like any other bodily function. I mean, I'm literally making art during chemo sessions sometimes because I'm sitting for 6 hours. What else am I going to do? I'll stop my watercolors, start making art. I don't know if I have a favorite piece, honestly. Because I made this work, a lot of this work has happened very recently. So I think I'm still kind of living with a lot of it. I mean, I would think that maybe the piece that I think most concisely talks about the issues I'm concerned about is probably the log pile series. With that idea of like having these like really bright, kind of almost like violent colors kind of coming through, but still having an attention to detail. I'm really happy with that piece. I really like the light box piece that I built, beauty strip number 1. I really like that piece. Some of the newer drawings, honestly, I think I'm pretty happy with those. And honestly, the really cool thing I'm excited about is the newest iteration of my piece on Less, where it's all these different like landscape images with words kind of put on top where it says, we will all drown and burn. Because I was kind of trying to evoke that idea of like a lot of the very strong religious right imagery that we see on like I-95. So that's like, that is the same text font that they use on those like repent sinner signs. And I didn't source that paper myself. I actually did go out and purchase it, but it ended up taking on this like greenish, like kind of like luminous hue that I wasn't anticipating. So I'm already kind of thinking like, okay, so what can I do with other papers like that? And how can I push and pull space with drawing and that element? Because right now those are purely like, laser cut images for the most part. So I'm excited about what I'm doing moving forward. I am receiving the Governor's Award. It's a special award for contributions to our education and studio practice, which is really incredible. I was not expecting to receive that kind of honor this year. So I'm receiving that in actually a few days. And I am also in art fields this year. I feel really strongly about the piece that I have in art fields. It's probably, unfortunately, it wasn't able to be in this show because it's in art fields, but I actually feel like that is probably one of the strongest pieces I've made recently. Still come with this show though, just saying. But I'm really excited about that. I'm going to be teaching some workshops in art fields coming up. I'm just looking forward to like working with my students more. And I have a new series of drawings I have in my head. That I have some like handmade paper that I did make. That's all like different colors, and I'm going to be experimenting with actually drawing out the smoke from different burn piles, and then laser cutting like phrases and words into it. So kind of taking like a less series and kind of pushing it more, and actually letting like a physical drawing be a part of the imagery. So I know that's something I'm excited to start working on, to the point that I actually brought all the paper and stuff with me so I could work on it in my hotel room today. So, but yeah, I don't know how the work's going to shift. Again, I think it's printmakers. We tend to work in series anyways. We tend to kind of like lump things together. So I think you're going to see more work of mine that has, I want to introduce more text, I want to introduce more of that like push and pull with like the physical drawing with laser cut imagery. I think you're going to see a lot more of that moving forward. And yeah, I'm just excited to be making work, and again, I'm excited to be working with my students. So I mean, it all just like, again, it all turns on kindness. So I will say my experience with working with Arts Council has been amazing. Annie's been wonderful. She's been a great like collaborator on this project. Like really kind of like getting into the nitty-gritty, talking about what work needs to be in the show, what needs to step aside. I think that's been excellent. I think we've had some good conversations talking about the necessity of different pieces in the space. As a fellow curator, I appreciate your ability to kind of like step back and like objectively look at the work and find dialogues that maybe I don't see, because I'm definitely seeing some like conversations with some of the work that I wouldn't have put together as a curator, but they're working really well. And honestly, just the fact we're willing to drive down to pick up my work was a huge help. Because I definitely, right now, I hate that I kind of have a battery. Like everything I do kind of like takes a little bit of energy away. So it was nice to not have to like just drive up to Rock Hill, drop my work off, and then come back. So I mean, I think the Arts Council has been incredibly accommodating. And I really enjoy seeing my work in a space like this, in a more traditional gallery setting. Because I have had 2 solo shows in the last year. I had one in Hartsville, and I also had one at the studios in Key West. And those are both like very nice gallery spaces. I'm not trying to take anything away from either of those galleries, but they are a less traditional gallery space. Whereas this is a more contemporary gallery, and it's nice to kind of see my work, where I sometimes kind of feel like I'm a bit of an old fuddy-duddy when it comes to like being like a printmaker that's like scratching into copper and doing all this kind of stuff. It's nice to see my work treated as contemporary imagery versus, you know, people who want to like talk about like, oh, like how old the printing presses are and like how ancient is this process. And it's like, well, it doesn't matter. Like I'm using older techniques, but I'm still making contemporary art. Like my printing press might be 100 years old, but I'm not. The work isn't. So I appreciate the opportunity to kind of like see my work in a contemporary space and given that room to breathe. And the dialogue, like I said, that happens between the works. Yeah, so you can find my work on Instagram, Blue Sky, Threads. It's all under at Ian J. Welch, INJWELCH. I had to think about how to spell my own name for a second there. Yeah, and I also have a website. My website's also the same, ianjwelch.com. And yeah, I'd love to have anybody likes to work, talk to me about it.